Welcome to Brooklane's Facebook Live event, The Importance of Student Mental Health. I'm Kurt Miller, Director of Public Relations for Brooklane. Thank you for joining us. We are offering our Facebook Live events as an educational tool for the community. It's important for us all to be comfortable with our mental health, and learning about mental health is a good place to start. Brooklane also offers resources on our website, such as blog articles and videos on our YouTube channel. Our next Facebook Live is planned for September 17th and focused on understanding co-occurring disorders. You'll find more information about this program on our website, which is brooklane.org. Our program today is The Importance of Student Mental Health, and it is presented by Laura Zukowski. Laura is a licensed clinical professional counselor providing therapy in Brooklane's school-based mental health programs. She graduated from Virginia Tech with a bachelor's degree in psychology. Laura completed her master's degree in community mental health counseling at McDaniel College. She began working with us at Brooklane in 2010 and later became a school therapist. Laura provides therapy at Williamsport High School, Boonesboro Middle and High Schools, as well as the Washington County Technical High School. She's presented a number of programs for us in the past and has contributed to our blog on the website. I think you're in for a treat and great information, and the information that's very timely with children going back to school. So Laura, thank you very much for being here and sharing with us today.
Thank you for having me. So I have done, as Kurt said, a couple of presentations within the past year on COVID and the impact that it's been having on our students. But it's been quite some time. So when I was asked to do this again, it was a little daunting just thinking about how much has changed even over the past 6 months, probably since I did the last presentation. So as we've noticed, COVID has had like a massive impact on our students, our families, just the school system in general. So with school starting back up, it is a good time to kind of review all of the challenges I think that were presented last year and, in the end of the year prior, and thinking ahead of how we can have a more successful start to the school year, keeping in mind everything that has happened. So with that said, I thought it would be important to review kind of what has been going on in the schools for the past 18 months or so. And it's crazy that we're even saying that it's been about 18 months, but that's kind of where we're at this point. We left March of the year 2019, 2020, and now we're going into, 2 school years past that. So, I work in Washington County schools for Brooklane, but we do services in those schools. So my main foundation of understanding from the school perspective is going to be based on Washington County students' experiences and the school's experiences that I've been with. However, I do live in Frederick County and have neighbors and friends who have students in the Frederick County system. And Brooklane is also based in Frederick County. So there may be some of you who are watching now or who will be watching this at some point. I will try to make it pertinent to you guys as well, but I do apologize if I goof up on some of the details of what it's been like for you guys returning back to, normal school life. So overall, just kind of basic review, and I probably don't need to tell you parents what the last year and a half has looked like, but virtual learning has kind of taken a precedence for a majority of the students, at least this last school year and kind of ending the school year prior. What I noticed was that a lot of the students that I was working with, and I was doing telehealth with a lot of them while they were at home, was that their bedrooms became their classrooms. Some students had a little bit of a different setup or something more organized, or they had something more structured within their home. But at least for the majority of students that I saw, they were kind of confined to their bedrooms all day. They were logging in the morning and staying on the computer throughout the day. Frederick County had a bit of a different system. They worked with different platforms and they had a different school schedule. Whereas Washington County, as you guys know, who are parents and students, was on Zoom throughout the day. There was a modified schedule, so it was a little bit, I think, more manageable in terms of time being on the computer and that kind of thing. But for the most part, kids started and ended their days in their bedrooms, in their bed. And as the year kind of went on, I noticed that most of the students were waking up, logging into their class as if they were present or taking attendance, and kind of falling back asleep. And so a lot of students were missing out on their first periods or going into multiple periods in the day, or they kind of tended to do that throughout the day. A huge break for everybody, but especially for these students in their basic routines. So now we've lost the time of getting up and eating breakfast and getting out the door, having time on the bus to kind of get ready for the day or kind of get set, going to different locations. That was definitely really big, is to not go specifically to a site. This is where my learning happens and this is where my home happens. So there was a really huge disruption with that, with all the kids that I met with. And I think as a natural kind of symptom of that, I saw a lot of low motivation, a lot of lack of energy. You know, it just really changed their overall mood and their overall feel. I think that we as adults all felt that too when we were on quarantine and when maybe our work lives changed and we were stuck at home. I can say that the first month of being at home, I definitely felt that. It was a huge shift to not go somewhere and be around other people and to transition to being on a computer all day. So whereas your teenagers may be on their phones all day or very used to being on technology, I think it was really draining for the kids. You know, there was a certain amount of classes a day, and even though it started a little bit later and ended a little bit later and they had breaks, overall, this is kind of what they were doing all day long. And I had seen from teachers telling me and from students telling me that logging into their classes, maybe it did start with everybody participating and having cameras on. I don't know exactly what the platform was for Frederick County, but being on Zoom, as you guys probably all know, you know, you've got your little screens, everybody who's participating, you see their face. And it may have started a little bit more at the beginning of the year with students presenting themselves and there being a visual for the teachers of who was in their class and what was going on. And quickly that changed to a lot of black boxes. I've even done presentations with people and had that as adults doing that. And that was kind of a little bit of a wake-up call for me to realize what it must be like for the teachers to not have faces to names, for most of that participation to be happening through chats. And I think for the students too, you know, you're getting up and you're going to school and seeing your friends and those social interactions, and those weren't happening. And you're getting on and you're going to class and all that you're seeing is your teacher. You're not seeing your friends and you're not engaging with other people. Even if the teachers made their best effort to do breakout rooms, I think that was a really big loss for a lot of kids to not have the, you know, just those interactions or even the visual that other students were there. So what I think naturally happened, and I'm sure that any of you parents who are watching may have seen this with your students, that students really started to fall behind. Even students who were very good academically in previous years, straight A kids, I saw really started to lack of motivation and just they weren't doing the work. And I think there may have been, I'm not a teacher, so I'm not sure. This is kind of coming from my students. It seemed like there was maybe more work being given to make up for that asynchronous time. So there was maybe more assignments and more paperwork that they needed to do. And that became pretty overwhelming for kids. So they felt very bogged down. A lot of my kids were telling me they were really behind. They had a lot of missing work. And at some points they didn't know how they were going to dig themselves out of that hole. A lot of work was going into end of marking periods to get caught up. So that became really stressful. And as a result of that, a lot of failing grades started to pop up. So again, my normal students who were really good were starting to see that those grades were shifting. And that was really difficult for them, but almost kind of like kicked them when they were feeling down a little bit. You know, how do I get myself out of this hole? And I see that I'm not doing well. You know, how am I going to work my way through this? I did do a presentation. I believe it was one of them was maybe February, March time. It was before students started coming back into the buildings or right about that time. And I had some data from one of my guidance counselors at one of my schools as to at least that high school and what their failure rates were looking like at that point in time. And so this was referencing that first marking period, which I actually felt like at least that first marking period, most of my kids started out being kind of excited. Okay, we're going back to a routine. This might be kind of good. But that slowly kind of just started to shift as kids got more overwhelmed and kind of got burnt out again on the virtual learning. So at that point in time, some of those stats looked like, there was a large majority of students failing not just one, but multiple classes. And I think one of the most telling data that I was seeing was that you had about a third of freshmen failing one or more classes or multiple classes. And that's a really big deal because you have these students coming in and for the first time experiencing high school, and they're not starting out well, especially in a period of time when those grades and those GPAs are starting to become more meaningful. And that's going to set them behind moving forward for the following years if they are not caught up or getting, the academic understanding that they need. So that was something that was really a huge concern for the schools, even just after the first marking period was, wow, this trend is really a big problem. And how do we help our students to get back on track? My kids overall for the year were reporting to me again that they were getting really overwhelmed with their missing work. Some of them were reaching a point where they felt like it was they were in so deep that they couldn't dig themselves out of it. So they stopped trying. They really were struggling with the fact that they were on the computer all day and then felt that they had a lot of assignments that they needed to complete afterwards. So, why am I going to want to do school? School's over. I've been on the computer all day. I don't want to keep doing that. A lot of them reported that they had trouble staying focused. I can only stay focused as an adult for certain chunks of time. So then you have a kid who's on a screen all day. Maybe their cameras aren't turned on, so there's not a lot of accountability for what they're doing. They might be getting bored, dozing off, scrolling on their phone, or doing whatever else. And so being focused on the material being taught was very difficult. And because of that, a lot of students felt that they didn't retain as much information during the virtual setting as they did in person. And I can say it's been more difficult for me to retain information from my clients that they're not on the camera with me if I'm talking to them, or even just in general, this virtual learning and this virtual interaction is very different from being in person. And so a lot of that information just doesn't stick. A lot of students and adults felt like it was Groundhog Day every day. So I'm going to wake up, do the same thing, and it just feels very isolating and kind of very meaningless. And if all I'm doing in my life is school, I'm just feeling really down on myself. And I also, lastly, had seniors who felt really overwhelmed by the process of applying to colleges without that in-person support. They had the support from their schools and their guidance counselors, but it was very different. They weren't able to go to their campuses. They weren't able to go get a feel for what college would look like because a lot of tours were canceled. So there was a lot of stress and a lot of uncertainty going into, the year with seniors who really didn't have, that firsthand experience of visiting a campus and doing those types of things. But we are fast forwarding a little bit, kind of going into that February, springtime when schools were allowed to start reopening. So what I saw from Washington County was that, they started off with a group and then every 2 weeks they added in. And then by April, you were either all in school or you were all virtual. So a lot of the students that I worked with were able to go back to school, and that ended up being an amazing positive. Frederick County, I believe, for the most part, went hybrid. I think they were all hybrid, if I'm not mistaken. And so they did go back, but I believe my neighbors were only going back twice a week for their high school and middle school kids for about half a day of what they normally. So it was a limited and modified schedule, and it was only twice a week. I think towards the end of the year, elementary schools were allowed to go 4 days a week. But whereas Washington County kind of resumed as normal, Frederick County kind of stayed on this hybrid model. And so it really wasn't a normal school year for them for most of the year, if not the rest of that year. And with that said, Washington County saw a lot of changes. Every couple weeks, there was more students added in. Their school schedule changed, so the days got longer and longer. So if you weren't virtual, that was a really big impact too of I'm staying on the computer now for the full school day, and I'm logging into classes where there may or may not be technical difficulties. The teachers are really doing their best to try to teach in person and virtual. And that was just a struggle, I think, for everybody. And that, I think, did impact some of the learning and some of the motivation for the students who stayed on virtual. But I did see a really dramatically positive increase just in a lot of areas for the students of mine, at least, who went back to school. And I'm not saying everybody, but I had students who felt immediately that going back in just made them feel better. Being back on a routine, being back around others, sitting in a classroom and learning things live from an instructor, they felt more motivated, they felt happier, they felt increased energy, and they were able to more easily get their work done. And I think some of that is separating your school space, like I said earlier, from your home life and your personal space. So for some kids, it was, I've been working with them here and there, and then they went back to school and they're like, I'm doing okay. I'm doing a lot better now, which was awesome. But what I also saw was that by the time some of these students were getting back into school, things had kind of deteriorated a lot between their academics and their mental health. And then parents were coming in like, I don't know what to do. My student's really depressed. They're really behind. I'm seeing things now that I've never seen before. So I got a lot more referrals to work with what I would say is your everyday average student, the students who've always done well, maybe are in, athletics, or very socially inclined kids that would never necessarily be flagged for having any major issues or major concerns. Now I was starting to see a lot more of those kids and a lot of families who were really just not sure how to handle situations because they've never been faced with this stuff before. So I think a lot of us probably saw an increase. And I know in the outpatient office, we've been flooded with new intakes and new referrals because there's a lot of just increased stress and issues that have been going on that maybe we really haven't seen before. Overall, I felt like the students that I was seeing in the spring at the schools when we went back, there was a lot of increase in depression. I think that Groundhog Day, kind of lacking meaning in their day, feeling like their life was just consumed by school, the lack of social interactions, the lack of being able to see their friends. Some kids were able to be more social where others weren't. So for some kids, they hadn't left their house. I have a young lady I work with who legitimately hadn't left her house pretty much from the start of COVID, like until this summer. Maybe 90% of her time was spent in the house. And if she ever went out, it was just for groceries with her mom because they had a sick grandparent in the house. So each family has looked different. I had a young middle schooler who was just beside herself when I met with her for the first time because she didn't have access to a phone, which is understandable for her age. So a lot of her friends, she was very disconnected from. She couldn't reach out and talk to on a daily basis as easily as others could. She hadn't been able to hang out with her friends pretty much since COVID had started. So I'm meeting this young lady who's just extremely isolated, is showing a lot of increased anxiety, a lot of stress, and just really struggling overall. And I did have quite a few kids who I started seeing who maybe their home life was a little rough before COVID, but everybody being home on COVID and all of the extra added stress that came with that just really put that to a new level. So now I've had students who've been at home with their families in a chaotic or abusive or really unhealthy environment, and they've been stuck there. So school became really a lot more meaningful for those kids to be able to get out and have a safe place and have a break. So it's just been a really difficult year and a half for everybody. And at this point, honestly, I don't know what all of this looks like because in Washington County, we still haven't started school yet. So I'm not sure what impact the summer has had on these students. That will be seen very quickly. Frederick County, I know, has started school this week. So some of these suggestions I'm going to make to you here shortly, they're kind of, maybe that could have started a little sooner to kind of get students in the flow, but we're already in school here in Frederick. And what's wild to me is that Frederick County students have not been in full-time school since March of 2019, or yeah, right, 2019, I think so. I might be mixing up the days, but it's been about a year and a half. And that is a whole new world of just looking at what their lives are looking like, and maybe some of the anxiety and some of the stress or excitement of what that's going to look like now to be back in school. I think it is a little different for a Frederick County student versus a Washington County student of what this school year really means to them. And as I had mentioned, the failure rates were a really huge concern, not only in the first marking period, but that continued on. And I recently had a discussion with another guidance counselor and just kind of asked, like, hey, kind of roundabout, is there data on the failure rates? Kind of what did that look like finishing out this year? And there wasn't any solid data, but just the general information that I received from her was, in order for a student to be retained, which means that they are not moving on from 9th grade to 10th grade, technically being classified as a sophomore, means that they didn't get 4 credits for the year, I believe, and I apologize if I'm wrong, which is very easy to get, being in 6 classes a day for the most part, twice, 2 semesters a year. They normally, she had said, they would see maybe 5 to 15 students who would be at risk of being retained for the following year. And they'd obviously work with those students, try to come up with plans for summer school and try to make that not happen. But this year, she said it was about 70 students that they were looking at being retained, which was just an astronomical number that they hadn't seen before. And that's meaning that these students did not pass 4 credits for the year. That's a pretty big deal. And that's why, at least in Washington County, I don't know what Frederick County's plan was, but they did a huge push for summer school. And a lot of that summer school, if not all of it, was really to recover those credits that they failed the class. So it really wasn't teaching and redoing the class in terms of instruction, but it was getting them to a point where they weren't failing. Which was very successful in the sense of a lot of students were able to recover the credits and move on to the next grade. But as I'm going to kind of get into later, there might still be some issues with that in terms of the educational component for this year. So that just kind of gives you an idea of where things were kind of leading off last summer or last school year going into the summer. And so I was asked by Brooklyn a few weeks ago, to kind of make some suggestions for parents of what we can do this school year to start off on the right foot and to really help our students be successful, especially in the wake of all of the stress and all of the changes that they've experienced within the past year and a half. Some of these are super basic things that you would do every year. And some of them are just kind of taking the points that I've made and applying them into this school year. So one of the suggestions that I made, and for Frederick County, you've already started school. This doesn't really apply as much. Washington County, you guys have a week, but every teenager and young student, for the most part, gets off of their sleep schedule in the summer. I have young kids, and even in the summer when the sun's out later, we're not going to bed at our normal time. But some of the older teenagers are just so far off their routine. They're going to bed in the middle of the night. They're waking up in the middle of the day. And that makes it very difficult when school starts back up to get back on a routine. So if that's an option for you at this point, if you have a Washington County student or you're somewhere else and school hasn't started yet, I would say really work now to establish a better sleep schedule. So starting out with going to bed at a more normal time and getting up at a time that they're going to have to get up for school. That's going to be really helpful in them reacclimating to the school year. And I also think that this school year is going to be very tiring for a lot of kids the first few weeks. I remember every year I'd start school, I'd be so exhausted just because I've been out of the routine. I hadn't been getting up early. But for a lot of these students, this is going to be really different. Frederick County students, again, they've not done a full day of school in a really long time, 5 days a week. So that's going to be kind of a shock to their system. But we're not just talking about getting up and going to school and coming home. I think for a lot of students who've been a lot more isolated, going into social settings, now for Washington County too, all of the students are back, whereas there were quite a few at the end of the year, but not a full classroom, not full hallways. And what I see is that that's really like an overstimulation. So when you're going out into social situations, there's a lot of people and there's noise and there's a lot of stuff that you really haven't had to see or deal with. That in and of itself is really tiring. So if you can help your student get back on a better schedule before this starts, I think that's going to lend to them not being so worn out and drained and just overstimulated and overwhelmed within the first few weeks. But keep in mind, again, that that's probably going to happen if your student isn't used to being around all of these people. They're not, back in social systems from the summer. And so that might just be something that you're going to have to be more mindful of with your kids and try to help them get back to bed earlier and just kind of, get better adjusted to this school year. And for the fact that a lot of the year was virtual and a lot of things looked really different last year, getting organized. So that could mean that you haven't needed to get school supplies in a really long time, or maybe they might need new things that they haven't had to use because they've been on virtual. So just getting them the supplies that they need, helping them get organized. So if I've been sitting in my room just doing virtual stuff for the past year and a half, I don't have my binders and my notebooks and all of those things set. I haven't looked at a planner possibly, and I haven't gotten those things kind of in order. So if families are kind of helping students to do that, I think that would be really great. And again, the planner I think is huge. I know that they usually get one for free from the school at the beginning of the year, but especially given the academic issues that we've discussed, it's going to be important to help them stay on track. And kind of going back, the anxiety that these kids have been experiencing and all of the mental health concerns that we've been seeing, I think it's really important for parents to be mindful that just because life is sort of returning to normal for the kids doesn't mean that there might not be a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress associated with that. Again, all of the students, for the most part, unless your family has decided to remain virtual, will be back in the building. Whereas that really hadn't happened in either school system last school year at all. So that's a lot of people, a lot of faces to see, seeing people you haven't seen in a while, and that can be pretty stressful for kids. There may also be a concern of safety in terms of COVID, and now I'm around all of these people. Teenagers haven't been as focused on that as maybe us as adults might be, but that's something to be mindful of, that maybe they might be a little more worried about that and being close and being around a lot of kids. There's also students coming into a new school that they haven't been to before. That might be, your elementary school students starting kindergarten. Mine started today, so that's all new for me. Or, going into middle school, or being a 7th grader or a 10th grader and you've never been in your school before. So that's a huge change, and it might be stressful for a kid, just those new start of new school year concerns of, am I going to be able to find this place? And I don't know where I'm going, and are the teachers going to be nice, and that kind of thing. Again, they haven't seen a lot of friends for a long time. And because a lot of students were a lot more isolated, even students that were able to see friends tended to keep that network a lot smaller. Not everybody, but it was a little bit different and a little bit surprising to see how small they kept their networks, or how they tended to continue to stay isolated even when things were permitted to be more normal. I've also noticed in the spring, and I would imagine this could be a concern again, is that a lot of kids are really worried about how well they were going to perform in person. And what I mean by that, is that a lot of kids, as I said, didn't retain as much educationally as they would have wanted to on the virtual setting. Again, not everybody, but some kids just felt really disconnected and distracted. And if you would ask them what they learned in November, that would be, they're like, I can't even remember most of the fall and what I learned. Like, it's just kind of out of my head. And as bad as this might sound, I'll say the word like learning aids. Your students had access to Google and their friends and a lot of other aids to help them with their homework or assignments or classwork that maybe wouldn't have been allowed if they were in school. And so that has kind of helped the student get through and get their work done, but it hasn't been helpful in the sense of, if Google can tell me the answer to my history question, then I'm not necessarily learning that and retaining that as much as I would otherwise. And there's apps and stuff for math. I mean, man, I probably wish I would have had that when I was a kid, but there are tools that they're either given access to by the school or by, family or whatever, or they're just available to them that have kind of hindered that material from kind of staying in their head. And so that might be just an overall concern for your students, is how well am I going to do if I don't have that, or if I can't just check something on my phone while I'm in class. And kind of going back to seniors, this summer was more normal. So maybe your seniors have been able to visit colleges and really kind of get things picked out, but that may not be the case for everybody. And so there's natural anxiety for a senior going into their senior year, the pressure to get their schools picked out and to get their applications done and to apply for scholarships and do all of the things. So that's something that's stressful. And without having, maybe last year, having some of the coaching that they normally would have, or normally they could walk to the counseling office or check in with a resource about questions much earlier on, maybe they didn't do that. So seniors are always a unique group, but I think that I have some incoming seniors who are a bit more stressed out of what that process would look like, or maybe financially because of COVID or other things, college is not going to look the same as what they had originally hoped. So just kind of being mindful that there's a lot of worry and a lot of anxiety that your student could be coming into the school year with, even though things are sort of more so back to normal. And with that said, I think it's important for parents to check in with their students. That's a normal suggestion. And I think that there's a balance, parent view and student view. And I don't know what Frederick County is, Schoology or whatever. You can check the students' grades. You can see where they're at. You can look at their missing assignments, which could be a real value. And it could be a real stressor and frustrating thing for both you and your student. Sometimes parents are checking it every day and not recognizing that certain things just are going to take time to get graded, but their grade it looks lower than what it actually is. And some students are checking those things all the time and getting really stressed if they see one assignment bring their grade higher or lower, depending on how many others are in there to balance out. So those are really good tools to use, but maybe be open with your student of like, how often is a good time for us to look at this? Or can we sit down and look at it together? And like, let's look at the assignments and figure out, all right, how can we get this done? What do you need help with in order to complete this? Let's set aside this specific time and be really intentional with how you guys are going to work together to get it done, or how you're going to help your students stay accountable or setting aside the time to do it. Some parents trust their kids, and that's wonderful. Your student may have always been a very trustworthy student, but maybe that's changed within the last year and they did let missing work pile up, or they just got stressed. So because they've gotten into some bad habits, potentially they may need a little bit more support this year in just staying on track. So helping them set aside the time for homework, helping them fill out their planner. If that's a thing that the teachers will post their assignments and their due dates and things. So really helping them stay organized with that, so there's no like surprises. And I think there's remind apps and different things that help with it, but just being there as a support and really being a good guidepost for your kids on how to get the work done. And again, like really being a check-in on their mental health. Your student may not be coming to you and saying I'm stressed, but maybe they're telling a teacher, or maybe they're telling a guidance counselor. So if you get a phone call from the school, take that seriously. There's a lot that's going on. Some kids are dramatic, but some kids are really having a hard time. So maybe before school starts for Washington County, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling about this school year starting? Are there things that you are worried about? I think that's normal for us to do with younger kids. I did that with my son who, like I said, just started kindergarten. I understand there's a lot of things that he's stressed and worried about. It's a whole new situation. But I think we need to apply some of that to our older kids who are starting something again, but it's been a little foreign to them and it might be a little anxiety provoking. So doing those check-ins, maybe sitting with your kid at night, talking to them about their day and establishing more communication about things and just making sure that they're feeling okay and feeling, on track and not overwhelmed. And if you feel like there's concerns, you have support in the schools. You can reach out to their guidance counselors. There's a lot of things that each school has available to them to help support your student in whatever the concern is. And kind of last but not least, and I want to say this correctly and not step on any toes, but ultimately we're going into this school year with safety policies in place. And I don't know that any of us really expected that that was going to be the case. And I think we were all hoping that everything would be more normal. And, we're looking at another wave of COVID and it's too much. We're all ready for it to be done. But with that said, schools are putting safety policies in place. We can't avoid that. I'd like to believe that our school systems are making difficult decisions that they feel are what's in the best interest for the students' health and safety. But I also know that every household probably has a different opinion of what those policies should look like and whether they should be in place or whether they shouldn't. And that's not what this is about. But I think as best as you can to encourage a positive attitude about those safety policies is important, because ultimately those are the rules. And we want to encourage our kids to follow the rules of the school so that the school is a safe and healthy place and that your student is safe and healthy too. So if we have mask mandates, which I think have recently changed for Washington County, and I know Frederick County does, and whatever other policies that put in place, just try to be encouraging and positive to your student about it. Because if they go into the school feeling disgruntled about those things because you're disgruntled about those things, that may make it harder for everybody to follow the rules and be safe and to be healthy. So I think that's just really important. What we teach at home really reflects when our students go to school in a lot of different areas. And if this is going to be the way it is, then let's just try to go in and do the best that we can and hope that this passes and that we're able to resume more normalcy, which we've been saying for every month for the past year and a half, but God willing, hopefully that's going to actually happen this year. So, overall, it's just really being a lot more mindful, trying to stay in touch with our kids and stay in tune with what's going on and trying to help them maybe a little bit more than they've recently needed in other school years. I don't know what this school year is going to hold. I feel like this past year and a half has been a lot of changes and a lot of, adapting and doing things different. And so going in to this school year with being in the schools, I'm not sure what we're all going to be facing, but I know the kids that have the support and have the backing of their schools and their families, they're going to be in a lot better of a position. So I think that being back in school has been a really huge blessing for the kids that have been able to go. And hopefully that's the same for your students. So that's kind of it. I really hope that this school year turns out to be great and that all the students are really enjoying being back into some normalcy.
Laura, thank you so very much for being with us and sharing. Have not seen anything come in from the live chat. So Laura, I'm going to say we're going to sign off and
Okay.
thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Thank you guys.